In 1979, Britain declared one of its butterflies extinct. The large blue, the biggest and rarest blue butterfly in the country, was gone. And the strange part is that people had spent 50 years trying to save it. They fenced off its meadows. They stopped the collectors. They tried breeding it in cages, and every time the caterpillars died at 3 weeks old, and nobody could say why. Then one researcher spent 6 summers on his knees in the grass on Dartmoor, and he found the answer: underground. Bringing the butterfly back would take the last animal you'd expect. Here's what he found. The large blue does something almost no other animal on Earth does. It starts out ordinary enough. In summer, the female lays her eggs on wild thyme, the little purple flower that grows low on warm grassland. The caterpillar hatches, eats the thyme flowers for a couple of weeks, then drops off the plant and down onto the ground. And then it just sits there, waiting. It's waiting for a red ant to find it. When one does, the caterpillar puffs itself up and starts leaking a sweet, sugary liquid, and it gives off a scent that copies the smell of the ant's own grubs. It can even make a sound that mimics a queen ant. The worker runs its feelers over it, gets fooled completely, and picks the caterpillar up like a lost baby and carries it down into the nest. And that's where the trick turns dark. Because once it's underground, the caterpillar starts eating the ant grubs. One by one, for the next 10 months, it lives deep inside the colony as a guest the ants feed and guard and protect, while it eats their young. Then, the following summer, it pupates, crawls up out of the nest, and flies away as a butterfly. So this is why you could never raise one in a box. The whole second half of a large blue's life happens underground, inside an ant nest, living off the ants that carried it in. No ant nest, no butterfly. And it explains those caterpillars that kept dying at 3 weeks old in the collector's cages. 3 weeks is exactly the moment the caterpillar drops off the thyme and has to be carried underground by an ant to survive. No ant, no nest, no food. Sitting in a glass jar, it just slowly starved. And for over 100 years, nobody understood that the missing piece was a bug the size of a grain of rice. For a long time, nobody understood any of this. When the large blue started disappearing back in the 1800s, everyone blamed the obvious villain: the collectors. And Victorian Britain was obsessed with butterflies. The large blue was the big prize, the rarest and most beautiful of them all, and a collector would pay serious money for a perfect specimen. So they hunted the colonies hard and pinned the butterflies in glass cases, and the numbers fell. By 1950, only about 30 sites were left in the whole country. The obvious answer was to protect what was left. Fence the meadows, ban the collectors, guard the last colonies. So that is exactly what they did. And the butterfly kept dying anyway. That was the part that made no sense. The colonies were protected. The thyme was still growing. The habitat looked completely fine. But every single year, there were fewer large blues than the year before, and nobody could explain it. By the early 1970s, it was nearly over. The large blue had collapsed down to just a couple of colonies, and the last real stronghold was a single hillside on Dartmoor. In 1972, with the butterfly only years away from vanishing for good, Britain's Nature Conservancy handed the whole mystery to a young PhD student named Jeremy Thomas, and basically told him to figure out what was killing this thing before it was gone. So Thomas moved out to Dartmoor, and he spent the next 6 summers on that hillside, watching the last colony on the planet slowly fall apart in front of him. He didn't just count butterflies. He followed more than 1,300 individual eggs, tracking each one to see where it lived and where it died. And the pattern that came back was strange. The butterflies weren't dying up on the thyme, out in the open, where a collector or a hungry bird could get them. Most of them were dying underground. They were dying inside the ant nests. So Thomas stopped studying the butterfly, and he started studying the ants. And here's where it gets specific. On that one Dartmoor hillside, there were 4 different species of red ant, all living in the same grass. And Thomas noticed something nobody had caught before. The large blue caterpillars would get picked up and carried off by any of the 4, but they only survived in the nest of one of them, a red ant called Myrmica sabuleti. In any other ant's nest, the caterpillar died. So the butterfly wasn't just dependent on ants in general. Its entire existence hung on one single species of ant being present in that exact spot, in big enough numbers to take the caterpillars in. And then Thomas asked the question that finally cracked the whole case open. What does that one ant need? He measured the temperature of the ground across the hillside, patch by patch, and he found that Myrmica sabuleti is fussy about heat. It needs warm soil to thrive. And the thing that decides whether the soil is warm or cool turned out to be almost absurdly simple. It's the height of the grass. Short grass lets the sun hit the dirt and the soil stays warm. Let the grass grow just a few centimeters taller and it shades the ground, and the soil cools down. That's it. That small drop in temperature is enough. When the ground cools, that one heat-loving ant gets out-competed by the other ants that don't mind the chill, and it fades out of the grass. And when that ant disappears, the large blue has nowhere left to raise its young, so it follows the ant straight into oblivion. So the thing that actually killed the large blue was the grass getting longer. Which leaves one obvious question. Why had it suddenly grown taller all across Britain? And the answer is one of the strangest chains of cause and effect in conservation. For centuries, the grass on these hillsides had been kept short by grazing animals. Sheep, cattle, and above all, rabbits, millions of them, cropping the turf right down to the nub. Then, in 1953, a disease called myxomatosis reached Britain. Within about 2 years, it had killed roughly 99% of the country's rabbits. The lawnmowers were gone. At the same time, farmers were putting fewer animals out to graze this rough ground. So the grass crept up, the soil cooled, and the ant died back. And the butterfly that secretly depended on that ant starved out, colony by colony, while everyone stood around blaming the collectors. Thomas had finally solved it. He just solved it too late. In 1979, it became official. The large blue no longer flew anywhere in Britain. If you're the kind of person who finds this stuff as fascinating as I do, take a second and hit subscribe. Because untangling stories like this one is the whole reason this channel exists. Now let me show you how they actually brought it back. Because solving the mystery also handed them the cure. If the butterfly died when the grass grew long, then you bring it back by cutting the grass back down, using grazing animals to do it. You put livestock back onto the hillsides, let them crop the turf short, warm the soil up again, and give that one red ant its home back. Bring the ant back, and the butterfly comes back with it. So the rescue plan for one of the rarest butterflies in Europe turned into a plan about cows and grass height. There was just one problem left. The British large blue was already extinct. There were none left in the country to save, so they went and got more. On the Swedish island of Åland, there was still a healthy population of the exact same butterfly, living on the exact same kind of grassland. Starting in 1983, Thomas and his team brought large blues over from Sweden and released them onto British sites that had been grazed back into the right shape. The early releases through the 1980s took hold. One attempt in the Cotswolds failed, because the local climate was just too different from the Swedish stock the butterflies came from. But on the sites that worked, something remarkable started to happen. The butterfly began spreading on its own, back across the hills. Which brings us to a hillside in the Cotswolds called Rodborough Common, in the summer of 2020. For 150 years, not a single large blue had been seen there. The grass had grown long, the scrub had moved in, and the ant had vanished. The same story as everywhere else. So a partnership of conservation groups spent 5 years getting the land ready. And they didn't start by breeding butterflies. They brought in cows. Herds of Lewing, Hereford, and Longhorn cattle moved around the slopes behind temporary electric fences so they would graze exactly the overgrown patches that needed cropping. Short grass, warm soil, and slowly, the red ant came back to Rodboro. In 1919, the team released 1,100 large blue caterpillars onto that reborn grassland. Then they waited through the whole winter, while every one of those caterpillars was, hopefully, tucked away underground in an ant nest, eating its hosts alive. And in the summer of 2020, they went out and counted. Around 750 large blue butterflies lifted up off Rodboro Common and into the air. The first one seen on that ground in 150 years. So think about what actually brought this butterfly back from the dead. Not a breeding lab, not a cage, a red ant that it tricks and robs and eats, and a herd of cows chewing the grass down to the right height. Two of the most unremarkable animals you could possibly picture, quietly holding up one of the rarest butterflies in the world. Today, the large blue is back on more than 30 sites across the southwest of England. The biggest colonies now run to 4,000 or 5,000 butterflies in a single summer, and some of those grasslands hold the densest populations of the species found anywhere on the planet, denser even than parts of Europe, where it never died out at all. A species that Britain accidentally wiped out and declared gone forever is now doing better here than in the countries that never lost it. And all of it traces back to one man lying in the grass on Dartmoor, working out that a dying butterfly was really a story about the height of the grass, the warmth of the soil, and one specific ant nobody had thought to look at. Once he understood that, the rest of the rescue mostly came down to putting animals back on the hills and waiting. A butterfly Britain gave up for dead, back in the air over the Cotswolds. Still here, still flying.